Welcome to this episode of our continuing discussions with people who have followed their vision. And with me today is Pastor Monica Audu, the wife of Pastor Bitrus Audu, a missionary that set up several churches in the northeastern part of the country before handing over the churches to the Equa Church. You are welcome, ma.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Now, when he first told you that he was going to go to missions, what went through your mind?
Well, it wasn't strange to me because I had my own personal encounter with God. I used to tell people that I did not go to the mission field only as a wife of a missionary. I went to the mission field because I had a mission call even before I met my husband. So it was a very welcomed idea. It showed me that God really brought us together as a couple for a purpose.
Okay. Now, what went through your mind when he said the purpose for which you believed in was now coming to pass? What were the things that were going through your mind?
Things that were going through my mind was, first of all, I thought of where we are going to and where we were then and how to disengage because I was working with the federal government. And it's just that how we're going to leave the city of Jos to go and live in a place that we did not know. But those were questions in my mind that actually I knew that I did not have answers to them, but I know God who has answers to everything, all my questions.
When you went to do survey, what were your observations when you went for the surveys? What did you see?
Well, actually, I was in then Gongola State before he got the vision. I did my NYSC in then Gongola State, and we served. Our orientation camp was in Mubi Polytechnic. We actually hiked one of the mountains on the way that he saw in his vision. I'm sure he told you about the encounter he had. So what I saw when we went for the survey was like a confirmation, to what God had told me personally, and also a confirmation to what God had told him. I'm sure he told you he went to Coma Hills because Coma Hill was the popular known, but he went there and he saw that that wasn't the place. Actually, we had a baby then, our first baby. I stayed in Yola and he went for the survey. So when he came back and there was no click, it didn't look like what he saw in his, I told him that I heard of a place. A missionary came to our NYSC camp and is around Mobi. That's when he went. So it's like we saw things that confirmed the encounter that he had with God.
And walk us through your first impressions when you finally got to the mission field. Your
The
experiences when you first,
the people,
what was the first day that you went up to Karasude?
it was a long hike, and eventually we got to the village. I knew we were going to go to a village, but I never expected it to be that kind of a village because we're panting and we met these people. I couldn't speak Hausa then, but he was speaking Hausa with the people. I didn't know what they were talking about. I was expecting for at least a stool to sit on, but there was no stool. And it was like, in my village, we had stool, not knowing that the stones that were decorated were the chairs that you come to sit on. So my impression was like, wow, this village is backward. I could see many needs. And like my husband will always say, that is why God brought us to the place, because my impression was a very dry environment spiritually, and the people were not looking healthy or happy. The children were looking so haggard, and I felt it's like the impression was that of a Stone Age people.
Can you describe that for someone that doesn't know? The things that you actually saw as you were coming, the contrast, the differences between what you had in Jos and what you encountered?
Well, the village was a few then. They had few houses, round huts with a thatch roof. So to my mind, this is welcome. This is where we're going to stay. There were no hospitals, no potable water, no electricity. The women were wearing a bunch of leaf in front and bunch of leaf behind. That was their dress. Yeah, so many things. That was my first impression, the things I saw.
The women that you met there, how were you relating with them?
Well,
With the language barrier that you had, you couldn't speak Hausa well, or couldn't
it
speak
was,
Hausa.
yes, I had no Hausa then. It was hard for me to relate with them. And I was relating through gestures, smile at them, they smile at me. And they were very shy and to speak. And there was that language barrier. But somehow, because of the love of God, there's a love of God in my heart for the people. And I knew that somehow I prayed to God and I say, God, you didn't bring me here to just be doing gestures and hands, but I need to communicate your word verbally to the people. So I prayed to God to help me, and He did. I learned Hausa within a short while.
Okay, but even the Hausa, the problem with it in that place is that the people were also learning Hausa. They were not fluent Hausa speakers.
Yes, especially for the women and the children. The women and the children, all they knew was just their village. But the men used to travel out to nearby villages and towns like Mobi, some to Yola, so they could speak Hausa. Some of the men, not all the men. But for the women, it was hard to communicate with them.
And when you learned what were the first set of friends that you met there, and what type of challenges did you have?
My first set of friends were children. They used to come around, stand at a distance, and just be looking at me. And with, like I say, gestures, smiles. With smiles, they'll start taking step. I know one girl, Hawa. She was the daughter of the chief of the village, Angwa, they call him. And Hawa will always come and stand far off and with smiles, and I'll beckon on her. She came and sat, but we couldn't say anything. The first woman that I related with was Tumba's wife, Akuve. Tumba was the one that gave us a room, their own kind of special room in the village where we stayed. Kuve was Tumba's wife. She never went to school. She had not gone anywhere else apart from the village. And those were my first set of people to speak with. The men will only come to speak with my husband because he could speak Hausa and they could relate. Yeah, the children and the women were the first set of people I related with.
And at what point, and what were the circumstances that made you to kind of feel that that place was indeed the place that you ought to be?
The need, made me feel that this is actually what God has been talking to me from childhood. I knew that somehow, God had told me that I will serve Him. First of all, He asked me to give my life to Him and to serve Him. I didn't understand what that meant, because I didn't used to see women serving. They could sing and cook in church, So but I've seen Catholics, Reverend sisters, and I thought I was going to be a Reverend sister. But seeing the need there, when God told me one time that He was training me for missions, when I got there, I knew that this is the place. And there was peace in my heart, peace, even though there were no facility, no comfortable place to sleep, there was peace in I could feel God very close, to me. Seeing the needs, seeing the children, seeing the women, seeing the environment, I even thought we were going to be there and die there. I didn't know, because I came to love the people and love what God was doing in the place.
Well, as at that time, we didn't have challenges, at least when you started, of insecurity, so you had no fear. Were there issues of crime or stealing or theft or something that made you afraid at a certain point?
There were scary things. There was no Boko Haram and all that. But before we got there, we had known that the people, they could easily be at war with themselves, with one another, or with other communities. We had that story, and seeing the men, most of them used to wear animal skin, and some have just like shorts, but they used to carry knife, just like our ladies here will carry their hand purse. That's how they carry knives. That means they are very violent. They can fight themselves over issues like trees or farms or anything. They can easily fight themselves. So it was something to scare me. In fact, even their animals had not lived closely with animals like donkeys. They had donkeys at home. And then one day I had a sound of donkey. I thought it was a cry for war. Beatrice had to explain to me that it is a donkey. They are not blowing trumpet for war. And then we had reptiles, snakes everywhere. I'm scared of snake. Even if it's a dry stick or rag on the ground, I could run thinking it's a snake. But there we had snakes. So there were many things that could scare me. But like I said before, I felt the presence of God. Up to today, I wonder, why didn't I think of leaving the place and coming back? Because when I look back now to see the things that we face, physically, spiritually, materially, economically, but that presence of God was something that kept me not to be afraid.
Apart from the snakes, what was your experience? You talked about panting the first day that you had to actually walk from Michika, I believe, to the hills. How long did it take, if you recall? How did you cope?
Yeah, being a mountainous area, it was hard to move because there were no roads then, that time, and so there were no vehicles. So the cars only took us to Mubi when we left. When we went initially, we had not been to Michika. It was maybe after some years before we went to Michika. So it was a hard terrain, to travel. And I grew up in a place where there were no mountains, but I had always loved mountains. As much as I was excited being in a mountainous area, but it was difficult to climb. We kept exchanging, carrying our baby on our shoulders, until it took several hours from Gaja to what's the other place now? Wuduvi. From Wuduvi, we now had to start climbing up to Karasude. Karasude was our first mission station. So even in going from Karasude to Minte, when we started the second church, it's all climbing and climbing. So it's very difficult to, even within Karasude village, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we used to go out then for one-on-one witnessing for those that are around in the village at that time, because they spend most of their time on their farms. But even then, to move from our house to our neighbor, you climb, you go down the valley and you go up, so it was really difficult to move from place to place, which I wasn't used to.
Yeah. Okay. And now, at what point did things started settling down that you became comfortable? You said you were scared. Then, as a time you thought you lived through your life, there what were the things that actually made you think that you had become comfortable with the circumstances there?
Yeah. What took me to the mission field was God's purpose, the souls of men. So I became very comfortable when I saw God at work, the transformation, the changes that I saw in the women, the children, even the men, both old and young, the time we came to the village, and by the time they started accepting God's word into their lives, I could see with my own eyes the transformation. People that could not read, children, women starting to read. They were even joining us, in sharing the gospel to other villages. They would tell us, oh, there's another village in another place. Some other villages will come and do for us what you guys are doing in Karasude. Just seeing what God was doing, the transformation, the changes in the lives of the people spiritually, their physical looks. Now we were getting clothes to them. we come to town and our friends and other believers gather old clothes and we take to them. And they wear these fairly used clothes, I would say, but to them, it was something like a Christmas dress for those in the city. And you see them looking so beautiful. I'd come to love what God was doing in their lives, and I was ready to stay there for as long as God will have me to.
Well, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. We hope to speak again. Thank you for honoring our invitation. Thank you very much.